let's get the views of broadcaster, former editor of the Sunday Times, Andrew Neil. He'll be working with Times Radio during the election, to our great pleasure. Morning to you, Andrew.
Good morning to you.
The argument we've heard from a couple of Tories today actually is, well, there was always going to be an election either in the early autumn, therefore summer isn't that different to the early autumn, so there's nothing really to see here. How surprised were you, Andrew? You've seen a fair few elections in your time.
I think I was completely baffled. I didn't see it coming. I didn't really believe he was going to do it till I heard the words coming out of his mouth in the rain. By the way, I just point out to Mr. Rees-Mogg that a bad light does actually stop play at test matches, and so does rain. Rain stops play at test matches too. He clearly hasn't been to a test match in recent times, I just think it's a nonsense to say that it makes no difference, have it in July versus November. Look, I think the Tories have a mountain to climb, near mission impossible to win this election, no matter when it is this year. But in my judgment, they had a better chance of pulling off the impossible in November than they have in July, in which I suspect now they're going to go down to a famous defeat.
I guess the point, though, Andrew, is maybe they think this is as good as it gets, because it strikes me that the argument they're going to try and run in this election is things are turning, the corner's turning, the economy is going to prosper. They can't really say that, because if that were true, they'd wait. If there was going to be an economy that was going to be better and better and better, it's much better to have the election in October or November than it is in July. Maybe they look at they think inflation is about where it's going to stay, and they've got the borrowing numbers weren't very good, so they can't cut taxes. The headroom's gone. They weren't going to be able to stop the boats. Maybe this is the high point. It just feels like a low point.
That is precisely what the Labour attack will be. I mean, they will say this is a cut and run election. Labour will say, the Prime Minister says things are getting better. But if they're getting better, as you say, why doesn't he wait so we can see that they're getting better? People are not going to change their vote on the basis of 1 month's inflation figures. Certainly people like you and me that follow these inflation figures on a monthly basis. People don't. People work out how much money they've got in their pay packets, what they've got after tax in their pockets. People need to be convinced that the economy is turning the corner. People need to be convinced that living standards are rising again, that inflation has truly been conquered, that interest rates are coming down. None of that will be provable this side of July the 4th. So Labour will have strong to say, what do they know that we don't know? What's coming round the corner? If things are getting better, why are we going to the country on July the 4th? And I think they've created a rod for their own back on this, and it will give Labour some very strong campaigning points to make.
Meanwhile, Labour, we've heard Labour on today. Pat McFadden came on. He said the word change 9 times. Keir Starmer issued a video with just his social media message was change, full stop. Is that enough? Because some people are suspicious of Labour. They feel, how much is the militant left actually gone? Is it just waiting, quiescent, ready to rise again? How much can we really trust Keir Starmer? Because the message for Labour seems to be, trust us to change, but don't worry, we're not going to change the things you don't want us to.
No. Time for a change is the most powerful campaign slogan in the democratic world. And if I was advising Labour, I would make that their campaign slogan, because it's what the country feels. After 14 years of Conservative government, the country feels that it is time for a change in the absence of any reasons why they shouldn't. But given, you see, this is not 1997. When it wasn't just that the country was fed up with the Tories, they actively wanted Tony Blair and Gordon Brown. That's not the case this time. They are fed up with the Tories, but they ain't gagging for Keir Starmer. They're not that convinced by it. It's more, let's get rid of the Tories than any love for Labour. That's another reason for holding on. Despite Labour's strong, near impregnable lead in the polls, there is something quite flaky, something quite fragile about this Labour Party, and it's prone to self-inflicted mistakes. For example, this whole row over Angela Rayner, which could have been doused down within the first couple of weeks. Just take more recently, David Lammy's rather childish kind of student politician response to the International Court going after the Israeli Prime Minister. Keir Starmer's ability to turn on a sixpence when it comes to policies. When I interviewed him in the Labour leadership election campaign in early 2020, just on the eve of the pandemic, every single pledge he made on that interview with me, he had broken in under a year. Every single one. University tuition fees, nationalizing energy companies, various other things that I've forgotten now. And he said to me, these are not promises, Andrew, these are pledges. Well, I don't really understand the difference, but whatever the difference was, he broke them. So that's another reason for holding on, to see that some of Labour could have unraveled during the summer and into the autumn. But that ain't going to happen now either, because there's not enough time for July the 4th, which is why I repeat, I remain #baffled.
#baffled. Andrew Neil, great stuff. Good to speak to you. Thank you for joining us.
Let's hear from our political editor, Kate McCann. Good morning, Kate.
Good morning.
If you had to outline what you think, how you think the election campaign is going to be run, the tone of it, what would you say?
Well, I think the tone of it is one of the biggest questions for all of us, actually, over the next 6 weeks, because I think it will be the first election that will be fought more on social media than any that came before it. I think the tone will likely at times be pretty nasty. Labour MPs were already given a briefing before this election campaign was announced about the risk of AI, about the risk of deepfakes, because their party, and I imagine the Conservatives are too, are deeply, deeply concerned about fake videos, deep fake videos of candidates going out and derailing the campaign for days at a time while parties try to verify them. So in terms of the tone, I think that's something that we all need to be watchful of, and it's something that the parties have an eye on too. But actually, what kind of election it's going to be, that is likely to be a presidential one. And I think, we saw that yesterday, and everything Rishi Sunak said in Downing Street and everything he's said since has indicated that he wants to fight this election as the main person, that people are voting for. This is not about voting for the Conservative Party necessarily. It's about voting for him. He talked up his previous record under COVID. He talked up his time as Chancellor, and I think he believes that if he pits himself directly against Sir Keir Starmer, then people will be able to make a clear choice. For Labour's part, and you've talked about it at length this morning, they are pitching for a change election, but also putting their man front and centre, as we saw on their 6 First Steps launch last week.
Is there any consensus about the political calculation that has been made, if any, about certain figures, the economy, the summer, what's going on, events, etc.? What political calculations have been made that ended up with Rishi Sunak deciding to go early?
Well, I think that is it. So in reality, the Conservatives have obviously decided at some point that with some reasonably good economic news yesterday, it now would be the time to fight this election. And I've spoken to quite a lot of people behind the scenes in Team Sunak about, when was this decision first made? They say that it's been something that's been coming for a while, that Rishi Sunak has been thinking for a while that it would be good to go earlier rather than later. And there are a number of factors in that decision. Part of it is the economy. Part of it is that people have actually stopped listening. It's something that we've talked about many, many times on this programme before. And also, I think there is a fear that over the summer, things could potentially get even worse. There is a real worry about immigration, about small boats, about the Rwanda scheme. And part of that actually is also about the economy. There is a sense that some of the good economic news the Tories maybe had been counting on towards the end of the summer might not necessarily come. And even potentially worse than that, maybe there wouldn't be enough room in an autumn statement, a fiscal event, to hand out any more tax cuts. Not that the ones that have been previously handed out have made any dent on the polling whatsoever. So I think all of those things taken in the round, and the sense that the Conservatives, particularly Rishi Sunak, actually were very worried about, how it would look if Labour could constantly hammer him for being the person who clings on. All of those things have contributed to this decision.
I want to ask you about the Reform Party. We've had pretty much everyone on and will have over the course of the programme, all the kind of the main political parties, but not Reform, because they've got some kind of launch at 11 o'clock. Do we know what's going to happen, and what kind of impact might the Reform Party have at an election?
Yeah, I'm heading down to that Reform event later on this morning. So we'll bring you all the latest on Times Radio about what that is. The speculation is that it could be Nigel Farage's big moment to decide whether he wants to get formally involved in this election campaign, although having spoken to people from Reform this morning, they still say they don't know whether or not Nigel Farage is going to be there, but they do say it's worth turning up. So I'm going to take their advice and head on down. Because we love an election campaign event. But the reality is actually there had been some real concern about whether Reform were going to make an impact on the Tory vote in this election. I think that has waned after the local elections, partly because of that result in the by-election where Reform didn't come second. Maybe that has cheered the Conservatives a little bit. They will still likely steer the agenda, and Reform is saying that they have candidates selected in a good number of seats, so they will have some impact. But it's whether or not they can really get somebody to coalesce around. And if Nigel Farage entered the race, I think that very well could be him.
Okay, Kate, thank you very much for that. That's Times Radio's political editor, Kate McCann.